Hello, friends, families, and DPS community. My name is Javier Ibarra, host of the EDUCA podcast in English. Today, our topic is somewhat hard, but I feel that it is our responsibility to address it and bring experts to EDUCA who can help us better be informed. Although September is National Suicide Prevention Month, suicide can happen at any time, any day, regardless of the month. Today, at EDUCA, our subject matter expert is Dr. Jane Linneman, Student Safety Coordinator and Team Lead of the Mental Health Services at Denver Public Schools. Dr. Linneman, how are you today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
This is our second time at EDUCA, and I'm very excited to have you back on to talk about a subject that, while it's part of the month, it's also important to talk about it throughout the year. Dr. Linneman, before we get started with our formal questions, I want to ask you, what motivates you to come to work every day so that our DPS students have a positive experience?
I truly believe that students should have the opportunity to thrive academically, through their families, through what their vocation might look like after they leave high school and then left us. But more importantly, I think every child should have the opportunity to experience joy. And some of the work that I do around student safety and helping to make sure people have strong coping skills, mental health wellness, hopefully helps them experience some of that joy and success in their lives.
The work that you do here is very valuable, and I'm excited to get into the subject today and ask you questions about suicide and suicide prevention. But for the folks listening in, I want to give you a little bit of information about the topic. We can all help prevent suicide. Every year, the Lifeline and other mental health organizations and individuals across the U.S. and around the world raise awareness of suicide prevention during September, which is National Suicide Prevention Month. If you are struggling, it's okay to share your feelings. This can also be looked as an opportunity for mental health advocates, prevention organizations, survivors, allies, and community members to unite and promote suicide prevention awareness. If you or someone you know needs assistance, please call 988 or in emergencies 911. Remember, it is important to end the stigma around mental health, and if you are having difficulties or thoughts of hopelessness and have contemplated the option of not wanting to live anymore, it is okay to share your feelings. There is help. Dr. Linneman, let's get started with our questions for today. I want to ask you about suicide. What can you tell us?
Hopefully today I'm going to share a lot of things about suicide. I think it's important for our audience to know that anyone can be at risk for suicide. You shared that earlier. I think it's important just to say it again. Today we're going to talk about our children and our youth and who might be more vulnerable or potentially greater at risk. And in that conversation, I'm hoping to share a little bit around how people can access help, because everyone deserves to be mentally well. And so part of today's conversation truly is extending the intent around Suicide Prevention Month, which is September. Thank you for sharing that. But in my philosophy, every day is suicide prevention. And so hopefully today our audience will learn a little bit more around the risk factors, the warning signs, what resources are accessible to our community, and then hopefully we'll find some mental health wellness.
I appreciate that. And for our folks listening in, there is help, and we're going to be sharing everything a little later in the show. I want to ask, who is at risk of suicide?
Yeah, so as I shared earlier, anyone can be at risk for suicide, and we also know that there are specific individuals based on their risk factors, the exposure that they may have experienced in their lifetime can put them at a greater risk. Individuals who have mental health illness, individuals who have had a prior suicide attempt, individuals who've had a family member or a friend who have died by suicide. We also know that our children of color currently are showing to be greater at risk. We know that our children who have areas of disabilities or exceptionalities can present differently and at times can be overlooked, missed opportunities to intervene with them, which also can put them at a greater risk. Overall, from a demographic standpoint, we know that our Hispanic population has greater frequencies related to suicide. So it's really important to remember anyone can be at risk, know the risk factors, know the warning signs, and know how to engage if someone is in a crisis and needs support.
And here at Denver Public Schools, we have a large Hispanic population.
Yes,
so I
we
think it's
do.
important for us to discuss that in the resources. I want to talk to you and specifically ask, how do suicide rates differ among groups of people?
So we know that our Hispanic population can be more than 2 times likely to die by suicide. We know that students
Wow.
from a Native American population can be up to 8 times more likely to die by suicide. We know that our children of color tend to be at a higher risk compared to our white Caucasian students as well. Some of the variables that kind of inform like why are we seeing some of those differences can be exposure to poverty, exposure to discrimination, harassment, exposure to domestic violence. So all those things that can impact your mental health also can elevate the risk, at which point you might experience something we call suicidal ideation, which is thoughts of wanting to die. As well as the risk to actually move forward with a completion and die by suicide.
Those are some very serious statistics. But because we're having that conversation, it's important for us to know. Because if we don't talk about these things, we, as a society, might dismiss them. I might say, well, that's not a real thing. And we're here to talk about it and say, no, there are warning signs and there are resources. I want to ask you, around the warning signs, what are some warning signs of suicide?
Warning signs are things that you can see, you can observe. So it might be an individual who isolates themselves from support systems. We know that everyone wants to feel as though they belong and want to feel connected to others around them. And so when people kind of withdraw and isolate away, that should be something that raises concern. We also know that individuals who are looking things up online, social media, concerning posts that indicate that someone's having some big emotions, and both ends of that continuum. We know that people who struggle with depression can show signs of sadness, crying, for example, but we also know they can show feelings such as anger, outbursts. So anything that is kind of deviating, shifting from what is typical of a child should be of concern and is considered a warning sign. We also know that students who are at risk for suicide might write about death. They might read about death. They might listen to music that is kind of focused on death.
Right.
So things, again, that are not necessarily typical that you would see for a child or an adolescent, that where your spidey sense goes, ooh, something's not right, that potentially is a warning sign that would require someone to engage in a conversation.
So I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of a parent. And if I saw, for example, my child kind of go into their room and isolating themselves, and depending on their mood, they're a little quieter, or I've noticed that they're listening to different types of music that might be a little, I want to say sad, but raising a concern.
Yeah.
If I was that parent, what do I do with that?
So there's a couple of things that I always tell my parents. One is always create a safe space whenever you engage in a conversation with your child, because the majority of experiences that parents have is that their children get defensive. I think adults get defensive too whenever you kind of say, hey, something's wrong, are you okay? Oftentimes you'll hear a child say, I'm fine.
Right.
I hear you saying you're fine, but it's also important to point out why you think that they might not be fine. So create that safe space that will open up that conversation. Remember to ask questions and listen. Don't interrupt. Don't infer judgment. Don't criticize. One of the biggest things I tell parents is don't say, oh, it's not that important or it's not that big, because to them those emotions are very big and they're very real, right? No different than ours. You don't want to invalidate someone's feelings or experiences, but rather you want to listen and affirm that you're hearing them. In that conversation, I'm a big advocate for saying, you used to spend time with your friends every day. I couldn't keep you at home. I've noticed over the past 2 weeks you haven't left the house at all. That's different.
The-
Why is
yeah,
that?
the way that you
Yeah.
asked me that, it kind of made me want to prompt and answer it without even subconsciously, like, oh, it's because of this.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you also don't want to open up with questions to where you're inferring what that answer is. So you don't want to say, oh, you're okay, aren't you? That gives someone permission to say, yeah, I'm okay. Not necessarily share how they're feeling. So being open-ended questions whenever you're engaging with them. And at times, if the concerns elevate, you're going to be more direct in your questioning.
Going along with that, I want to ask you, what treatment options or therapies, some sort of the resources are available here at Denver Public Schools?
Yeah. So going back to your question around parents, I think it's really important for all of our parents to know that schools offer regular trainings. Every year, they will provide an annual training to parents. It's optional, right? But you are welcome to come and access information, because as I just modeled for you of how you might open up that conversation, you need to take that conversation to the next step and be direct in your question. You may need to ask your child, are you thinking about killing yourself? That's a hard thing to learn.
That direct.
That direct. So going back to the services DPS offers, we offer training to our parents, training to our staff, training in our schools, and we train our students too. So I think that's a very big resource that I want parents to hear and know how to access today. And you can call your school, ask them when their training is. We in central office are also providing trainings, both remote and in person. We recognize life gets in the way sometimes, but that is a service. Another thing that DPS has been a strong advocate for is building out mental health services in schools. Every school has at least one mental health provider. In more cases than not, you've got multiple mental health providers, DPS employees. So you've got school social workers, school psychologists, school counselors, even school nurses who also serve as mental health providers.
Right.
And then again, in terms of extending those opportunities, we have community providers in our schools. So we have school-based healthcare clinics that are also staffed with mental health. We have contracted with private providers. So we have Denver Health therapists, we have Jewish Family Service therapists, and all kinds of other service providers that help with mental health. And then we also promote kind of an awareness of what else is accessible, because while we can staff our buildings, we can provide programming and training, every now and then you're going to come across someone where that's not where they want to access their service. So we also help support awareness of community resources. So you'll see posters up in schools, you'll see handouts coming home in the folder of your elementary school child, you'll see tables of information at back to school night or parent teacher conferences, because there's not a one-size-fits-all model,
Right.
and it takes a community approach. So while we continue to build out our services, we also look to partner with our community.
I want to highlight something that you said, right, about all of the resources that you just mentioned, because I was amazed of how many resources that we have for parents. And I think that sometimes when you're not necessarily looking for that resource, it's easy to overlook. Like you said, those pamphlets are in the folders that are going home. The professionals and individuals are at every school that we have here in the district. And I think that a parent might not see it until they need it. But it's important for everyone to know that those resources exist, and they exist now.
Yeah.
I want to ask you, and this is somewhat of a serious question. Of all of them are serious, but this one has to deal with something that a parent might ask, which is, does asking your child or anyone in general about suicide put that idea in their head?
That's a very common myth, and we have a lot of people who contribute to that stigma and avoid the conversation because they do believe it's going to put it into someone's head. That's not true.
Right.
Rather, what it does is it provides the opportunity for someone who's having big emotions, who's really struggling, the opportunity to say, hey, I'm not okay. And it's okay to not be okay.
Right.
But if we don't create that space, ask those questions, then they're not as likely to access that support. I can tell you there's tons of research out there, there's tons of professional organizations, there's tons of practitioners who've been doing this work that will reaffirm for you. Talking about it is not planting a seed, you're not putting it in someone's head, but rather if someone's already having the thoughts, gives them that opportunity to
Gives
talk
them
about
the
it.
resources, gives them the like you said, the opportunity to speak up and understand that it's a safe space. I want to ask, and you mentioned this a little earlier, it's okay to not be okay. But what was that second part that you were telling me earlier?
It's okay to not be okay, but it's not okay to not be okay for a long time. Right? We are trying to normalize mental health and let people know, like, everyone has big emotions, everyone has different experiences, and there's going to be days you feel great, there's going to be days you might not feel so great, you might feel a little crummy.
Right.
That's okay. That's part of the life experience.
Right.
Where it becomes concerning, and more importantly for our parents to know, is if you see it lasting over a longer duration of time, it's no longer okay. Right? There's something that needs a response. It needs help. And maybe your child needs an opportunity to share what's going on so that then they can access whatever that help is. So again, it's okay to not be okay, but it's not okay if it lasts for a long duration of time. And from my perspective, anytime I see a child who's struggling for about a week, maybe 2 weeks, depending on how old they are, what their age is, it's no longer okay. And I'd rather just have that conversation than say it's okay.
Right. And 2 weeks doesn't seem like a long time, but it could be a long time in their world.
Yeah.
So it's important to notice these signs early on. Going along with the questions that we were asking earlier, my next question for you is, do people threaten suicide to get attention?
That's another myth. A lot of people will say, oh, my life is over, because they're frustrated, they haven't quite used their words appropriately, and someone's like, oh, you're just asking for attention. And the caveat in the area of suicide prevention is you have to take all concerns seriously, because it's not okay to make statements like that. It makes me worried about you.
Right.
And so oftentimes if I see something that's concerning, I will say, you know, what I hear you saying makes me worried about you. I need to ask you a couple of questions to make sure you're safe. And if they respond back, oh, I didn't mean anything by it, then I have to have a conversation around, but your language didn't say that. So let's talk about what you might be able to say to communicate how you are feeling or what you might need. So it's some of that language development. Our younger kids struggle a little bit more, right? They don't have the huge vocabulary that some adults do. And our older adolescents sometimes are less likely to use appropriate language because they don't want to talk to you. But working on that language and making sure that what they're saying is heard, but also is always taken seriously and responded to.
What do you think about what social media does to this topic, what TV does to this topic, what movies do to this topic? What does that affect on our children, and specifically right around the language? Because I think that there are some children who pick up that language of something they saw or even heard, but it stems from some of the culturalisms that we have through social media, through movies, through TV shows.
Yeah, I think sometimes we forget that our young children are sponges.
Right.
They absorb what it is they're exposed to, what they see. What we normalize is okay, compared to some of our older children who might push and challenge things a little bit based on what they perceive to be okay. So just moving with that theory, social media, entertainment, adult interactions between caregivers or friends are very influential on children. It is very important for adults to kind of model appropriate behavior, model mental health wellness, because then our children have a better understanding of what it means to be okay. Right? But if we are not modeling wellness, then they might perceive that is okay. And you can start seeing some of that mimicking behavior, or they might adopt some of those maladaptive coping skills, things that just aren't healthy for them. So it's really important to, in my opinion, minimize the amount of time that they're online unsupervised. It's very important to watch those ratings of entertainment, as the guidance really is helping to guide caregivers around what's appropriate and what's not developmentally. It's not a value in terms of what your child can or can't do. It's more about, we know there's an impact. So how can we be more informed to help make sure that they are mental health well, compared to being exposed to things that really are going to challenge their understanding of right and wrong and what's healthy and what's not.
It's interesting that when I think back on everything that I consume as a general person of society, all of the media that I consume, I'm trying to think back if there are examples of language where, you know, it's okay to say, oh, I'm just going to kill myself because I'm having a rough day. right? Is that portrayed in the media? And I'm trying to think of examples, and I want to say there is.
I feel like I most often observe those in comedies, adult
Right.
comedies, right?
Right.
And as adults, we kind of understand the subcontext of the storyline and
But
don't
it's a
get
comedy.
and we don't get as caught up on the specific use of language. In my area of work, you will hear me often say language has impact. You have to be cautious around what you're saying. What is your intent? In DPS, we talk about owning our impact, and
Right.
part of that is how we are interacting with others. Language, for example, in this area, we do not say that someone killed themselves. We say that someone died by suicide. There is a criminal notation
Right.
of committing something that really doesn't align with the mental health illness that is often associated with those who are at risk for suicide.
That changes the stigma, that changes the narrative, if you will, of what suicide is, because you're right, it puts the blame on the person who died by suicide
Yeah.
versus the mental illness or health of the person who died by suicide.
When someone loses someone due to suicide, it's not uncommon for those survivors to experience a wide range of emotions. A wide range of emotions. And I think that being intentional around your language and the values that sometimes we infer when we don't use the appropriate language can dehumanize that experience of those survivors. It's important to remember they're individuals. Something got in their way, and this was a choice that they made, and unfortunately, we lost them due to suicide. But there's still a healing and a recovery process, and you have to humanize this work.
It's heavy. It's heavy. The conversation is very heavy. I want to ask more on the what to do now is what should I do if I'm struggling or I know someone who is struggling, who is having thoughts of suicide?
I'm going to talk to our youth for a minute. So
Okay.
if I got any young listeners out there and they have a friend they're worried about, I strongly encourage you to talk to a trusted adult. It can be your parent, can be a neighbor, can be a teacher, can be your school psychologist. It can any trusted adult, because that's a lot to carry around.
Right.
And part of what our job as adults is
If
is
you're
to-
the trusted adult.
if you're the trusted adult, is to take that information, thank that friend, because that's part of being a friend, right? Is to show that you care enough to help that person get support and pick up that work. Take that burden off of that child. I know we have adolescents who are worried about friends and they don't know who to talk to. And so they kind of carry that around. I talk about it like the proverbial backpack. All those things you're not quite sure how to solve, you just throw them in your backpack and it gets heavy on someone,
while,
right?
yeah.
Your shoulders get a little weighed down. So if I've got young listeners, I would encourage them, please tell a trusted adult and let them take that up because they have knowledge about how to help your friend. If I'm talking to a parent, have the conversation. You can always ask and it be nothing, and that's okay. But don't resist to ask because it could be something. So make sure you create that safe space. Make sure you let your child know that you care about them and ask the tough questions because it's just going to provide that opportunity for them to talk with you. Let you in a little bit. Share what might be weighing on their brain or weighing on their back. And then at that point, you can work with other people to help identify what your child might need so that they can also become well.
We talked a little bit about social media, but as a parent or as a trusted adult, what do I do if I see suicidal messages on social media? And then maybe also, what do you do if you see them from your friend, right? You're on your social media and you see your friend just tweet something out or a new status update. What do you do in that situation?
There is a couple of options. And what I want to be clear on, there's no one size fits all, right? Like worst case scenario, you can call 911. You can report it.
Okay.
And sometimes we don't need to start there. So I'm a big advocate for talk to the person. Hey,
Right.
I saw you posted something online and it made me worry about you. Are you doing okay?
Yeah.
Right? Go to the human.
Right.
Remember to humanize, listen, be patient. And depending on what you get back, maybe you go tell a trusted adult. Maybe you call for a welfare check. Maybe you make a safe to tell report. It can depend on what that looks like. I gave you a couple of those, and I want to go back a little bit more about that. So one, talk to the person if you can. If you can't, one of the things is you can go tell a trusted adult and ask them to go have the conversation. Your school mental health providers, and as I said, like your social worker, your psychologist, your nurse, your counselor, they're happy to have those conversations.
Right.
And they work very closely with parents and students to have those conversations. And there are going to be times you don't want to go talk to someone, you're not quite sure what to do. In Colorado, we have Safe to Tell Colorado. You can go online and you can make a tip, at which point like you can screenshot something that's concerning on social media, upload it. They might ask you a couple of questions and then they pick it up and people respond to it. You can also call into their hotline and you also can make a tip that way, and then they also have an app. And I know a lot of schools are working with students about downloading the Safe to Tell app. That way if they ever feel unsafe, they can make an anonymous tip. And I want to say that again, it's anonymous. The only way anyone knows that you made that tip is either they had magical brain power, which happens, right? Like if we're friends and you told me something, I'm probably going to think you might have said that.
Right.
But unless you tell someone, it's anonymous.
Safe to Tell is a resource that we've mentioned on this show many times, but when we've mentioned it before, it's around deterring crime at our schools. And I think this is a great opportunity for us to mention that it's also a way to help prevent suicide.
It absolutely is. They actually have an option for suicide. They have a option for self-injury. So if you know someone who might be engaging in some cutting or some burning or something that is damaging to their bodies, you can make that report. They have a tip for depression. If you're just worried that someone feels depressed, right? Big emotions of sadness,
Right.
you can make a tip about that. Among other areas to get in front of any potential risk for violence, they have that as well. They have child abuse, they have domestic violence. I feel like there's over 50 different options that you actually can go through.
Right.
And we're in a unique position in DPS because our schools train our kids on that. So they get to learn about, oh, it's a tool. It's anonymous. I can use it, an adult can use it, and here's all the different ways I can use it.
I want to ask you a question around the importance of this. Why is it important for us to engage in these conversations, to provide suicide prevention resources? We're a school district. We are focused on making sure that our students are learning. Why are we focused on this?
Every life matters. And if we know that there's a program or a prevention or a conversation or a skill that we can teach someone that will save a life, we're all responsible to do that. And it takes a community approach. I used to joke all the time with my students that my parents weren't born with a handbook, just like my students weren't born with a handbook. And within that handbook, it's not if your child's having big emotions or they're experiencing depression, what do you do? There's no handbook to guide you in that. So it takes people in schools, it takes people in the community, it takes parents and caregivers, it takes students to figure out how we can better care for each other. And if we're worried about someone, what do you do, right? You might not be the person who can magically fix what's going on, but you sure can help find what might help that person who's in crisis or who might need support.
Is there a website or somewhere that folks can go to get more resources on the topic today?
Yeah, the state has an Office of Suicide Prevention. They have tons of handouts and resources. They give you information on text lines, but the Office of Suicide Prevention for the state is a great website if you're looking for more information. The Colorado Crisis Walk-in Centers is a great resource because you can walk in with a child, access a clinician who then is going to help identify if your child needs more support, if they need counseling, if they just need someone to check in with them at school, et cetera, and kind of triage, what does that child need? And that's a free resource. So you can go onto their website. I believe they have 5 locations around the Denver metro. And again, they're free. You can go in and do that. So you can learn information that way. And then of course, I'm gonna bring it back to schools. Right? You can reach out to your school mental health provider, ask for a fact sheet, a tip sheet, ask about those trainings so that you too can grow your skills as a parent. Ask about the programming we do with students, because right now we do programming in 5th grade, 6th grade, 9th grade, and 12th grade. And we use different programming for those different grades really to help make sure that our kids have adapted and developed the coping skills that they need to be healthy, and they know what to do if they're not feeling great.
Thank you for sharing those resources. Before we go, I want to share with everyone listening in and watching some facts around suicide. Overall, suicide is the 8th leading cause of death in Colorado. 8 times as many people died by suicide in 2019 than in alcohol-related motor vehicle accidents. 65.31% of communities did not have enough mental health providers to serve residents in 2021, according to the federal guidelines. According to the National Institute of Mental Health website, suicide is a leading cause of death in the United States and a major public health concern. When a person dies by suicide, the effects are felt by family, friends, and communities. We want to share this website with you all. Dr. Linneman, I want to thank you for joining us today on this topic. I think that it's important for us to share these resources, but more importantly, what to do, right? We talked about what folks can do if they see signs, what folks can do if they're the trusted adult, but also if they're a colleague of another student. Before we go, is there anything else that you'd like to add around suicide prevention?
I think it's important just to reiterate that suicide is preventable. That's why we call it suicide prevention. September is National Suicide Prevention Month, and I encourage everyone, don't let it live just in September. Every day is suicide prevention. If you need to grow your skills, find a training opportunity. You want to learn more, read a fact sheet, visit a website, talk to a friend, ask the question, how can I learn more? And then continue to keep that conversation going. That truly is how we prevent loss of life by suicide.
Thank you, Dr. Linneman.
Thank you.
This concludes our EDUCA DPS podcast for today. I want to ask everyone who's watching or listening to please help us share this content with families, friends, and other community members who might really find use of this content. For more EDUCA content and other stories, please visit and subscribe to our YouTube channel at Denver Public Schools Plus. And you can also listen in on the most popular podcast platforms such as Spotify, Apple, and Buzzsprout. It is important to give credit to the people behind the scenes who contribute to making of this and all DPS multimedia productions, starting off with Bill Good, Chief of Communications, Will Jones, Executive Director of Communications for DPS, Scott Pribble, Director of External Communications, Selena Nakamura, Director of Internal Communications, Don Pierce, Executive Producer and Videographer, Beto Gaitan, Multimedia Lead Producer and host of the Spanish EDUCA, Hannah Young, in charge of all of our social media, George Alexander, our Bond and Mel Levy Communication Specialist, April Spites, our Graphic Designer, Katie Hamilton, our Strategic Comms Specialist. A special shout out to our DPS educators, students, and parents. A big thank you to Dr. Alex Marrero, proud Superintendent of Denver Public Schools, for supporting EDUCA and all other platforms. Yours truly, Javier Ibarra, Senior Manager of Media and Public Relations, as well as the EDUCA host in English. Please remember to tell your children more often, and Dr. Linneman, if I can have your help saying this, I believe in you, and I know you can do it. Until next time.